Good morning. Thanks for coming out today. You know, you might recall President Obama's Life of Julia. And basically this was kind of this progression of this person's life with all of the government benefits she was going to get. We've now learned what the cost is for the people who are paying the tab for Julia. And it's a little bit rough. And we've had a little more time to digest the governor's tax proposal, and in particular the sales tax proposal. And I think the people of Minnesota now really understand that despite what the governor is trying to represent, that you don't raise $2.1 billion in revenue but have nobody paying more taxes. It doesn't work that way. And people are starting to understand that though the rate has dropped, the expansion of the base outweighs that. And so the bottom line for Minnesotans is, yes, you'll pay a little bit lower rate, but you're going to pay taxes on so many more things that you're going to have a much larger sales tax burden. That's very problematic, and that is the bottom line, is this is an extremely expensive budget. And I think you're starting to see people reflect that concern, and I hope they continue to put pressure on, because when we want to increase spending the way that they want to increase it, there's a price to be paid. And that price is pretty big, and it's going to be paid by everyone who goes out and purchases goods and services in Minnesota. Of course, the other big issue is the health insurance exchange is traveling through, and that has been a little bit disappointing. Obviously, the Democrats have the votes and the ability to do with that what they want, but the business community and other interested parties have asked for some changes in the bill. Republicans have offered no less than 15 amendments to try to fix some of those problems, and we're 0 for 15. And I know the Chamber of Commerce, that, as you're well aware, has been generally supportive of a Minnesota healthcare exchange, still says they cannot support the bill in its current form. They don't want a lot of the things that are in there, and the people of Minnesota ought to be very concerned about this one thing. Folks, 7 people that are not under the direct oversight of the legislature will have the ability to dictate how healthcare works in Minnesota moving forward. And I think that's very problematic to people, and it seems as though the DFL is not interested in compromising on any of those issues. Representative Loon?
That's good. Thanks. So you can actually see me above the microphone. Well, in the House, obviously, the governor's budget dominated a lot of the work that went on in committees this week, and there were hearings on digging into some of the details of his proposal. I personally sat on 2 of those, Ways and Means and Tax Committee, and a lot of questions that were raised. And I think Senator Thompson sort of hit on basically where the rubber hits the road, is that, you know, the proposal to raise sales taxes and expand the base is one that's been mentioned in a number of commissions, and that is how we respond to our revenue needs in a more stable way and to the changes in our economy. But there's also important principles around that concept that the governor did not incorporate into his budget, and that is with regards to business taxes. And where does that actually flow, and where does that hit? And that is, again, at the pockets of consumers and middle and lower class families. That base broadening and extending all of those taxes to business services is going to be kind of a double whammy, if you will, on consumers with regards to how these taxes are going to affect them. So, you know, I think we've got a lot of work to do, and I certainly hope that the Republicans will be invited to the table to look at some of these things. I mean, clearly we're not in charge, we're not in control, but I think we can offer some good suggestions for improvements here. The other thing I think we'd like to hit on is, you know, when you're forced to negotiate or work with 2 parties from both sides of the aisle, you can get some creative ideas generated on how you can reform government, how you can improve our processes, make us work a little bit smarter, as opposed to just adding more money onto the programs. And there's probably going to be more money in programs. That's, you know, the governor's initiatives, and some of them are good. But there's not a lot in the way of reform or how we can do things better. And I think that's really what Minnesotans expect us to do. So I hope, again, we'll be part of that process. Again, with regards to the health insurance exchange, you know, an issue that was highlighted this week with a bipartisan piece of legislation introduced, Representative Mary Liz Holberg and Senator Dibble, the issue of data privacy. this is a huge issue, I think, for Minnesotans with regards to how safe is your private information in the hands of government employees and government agencies that perhaps need this information to do their work, but it has to be protected. And we've had some very disturbing breaches and abuses of that. And this new health insurance exchange has some similar concerns and problems. Our Civil Law Committee is meeting on that issue today. So, I certainly hope that on our side, I think Chairman Atkins is overall shepherding the health insurance exchange bill. We have had a couple of members who have gone on in good faith to try to work on the exchange and come up with something that, again, will address concerns from the business community, others that are affected, protect patient and doctor relationships, and also data privacy. So far, we haven't seen a real willingness to accept some amendments that we're offering to try to make this work better for all of those interested parties. So I certainly hope we see some improvement in that. And then looking forward to next week, obviously the State of the State is a big event around here, and we're interested in hearing what the governor has to say. I think from our perspective, we are seeing some improvement in our economy. Unemployment's dropped to 1.5% or 1.5% over the last 2 years. Business starts are up about 18%. So I think our fragile economy is moving in the right direction. Perhaps not as fast as we'd like to see, but our overall interest is seeing jobs being created and preserved in the state of Minnesota. And whatever we do, I think that has to be our overriding concern.
Next week is gun week in the House. A lot of gun bills are going to be discussed. I know it's not your issue, but do you have a sense for how far, if at all, the caucus is willing to go on that issue, whether they would be willing to support universal background checks, banning certain types of weapons, changes in the way mental health is dealt with?
Well, I think, first of all, no, the caucus has not discussed those specific proposals. Most of the bills that you're referring to were just introduced yesterday, were dropped in. So we haven't had a chance to comb through them all and discuss them as a caucus overall. But obviously there's going to be hearings next week, and our folks that serve on the Public Safety Committee, I'm sure will be delving into the details and asking some questions. I think as an overall take on this is, first of all, people are concerned about safety of their kids, access to guns by, violent criminals or felons, and then also the concerns about mental health. There's a lot of issues here to be delved into. But I think overall we're going to want to know if there's going to be some changes in access to guns or Second Amendment rights, if you will. What is the efficacy of those proposals? How effective are they? How effective have they shown to be? And I think those are going to be some of the questions that our members will be asking.
The Mayo Clinic is going to be asking for a $500 million subsidy. Are you guys on board with the way they're trying to do this and the subsidy in general? Do you think it's worth it?
Well, I guess obviously from everybody's perspective in Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic is a huge asset to the state, to the nation, and to the world, frankly. World-class medical center, we all know that. I don't know the details of the specific proposal. Obviously, as members of the state legislature, we have to do what's in the best overall interest of the state, and certainly we're responsible for state infrastructure and those kinds of things. As far as the specifics of the proposal, Tom, it's a little too early to really know. We just started to hear about it over the last couple of days, and certainly no proposal made by an institution of that significance is going to be ignored by anybody in Minnesota. That being said, what they want has to comport with good government and the fiscal constraints that we find ourselves in and that sort of thing.
What do you think about a public subsidy for a private business?
Well, Pat, I think you know what I think. I don't believe that the government ought to be in the business of picking winners and losers. I think that what we ought to do is try to level the playing field and try to stay out of the way of businesses as much as possible, and again, not pick the winners and losers and not subsidize them. So philosophically, I don't think that's the way we ought to do business in America or Minnesota.
I have another question about campaign finance. we see reports today that say the constitutional amendments to ban gay marriage, for example, $18 million was spent on this group. Will you address the cost of that, the size of that campaign? It's the largest, biggest campaign in Minnesota, and it outspent, the Vote No people outspent by, I think it was 12 to 5.
Okay. Well, it's kind of funny. We hear a lot about the evils of money in politics, and number one, we'll never get rid of it, because where there's an ability to influence the process, people are going to attempt to do that. And one of the ways they do that is financially. So I'm a big believer in disclosure and openness, so we know what's going on. I don't think that people who contribute to Vote No or Vote Yes campaigns should necessarily be disclosed. I do think people who contribute to political candidates ought to be disclosed, as they are, if they do in certain amounts of money. But, this was a big issue for Minnesotans, and people put money into it, and I'm a realist. I mean, that's part of how we get business done in this world, is spending money on things that are of concern to us. And as long as the rules are the same for everybody, of the list of things I lose sleep over, it's not real high. But again, disclosure, so people know.
We're told there will be bills later this month to legalize gay marriage. Could you both give your assessment of the chances for that passing with some bipartisan support in each of your chambers, and describe the strategy for among your caucus for blocking that bill?
Well, first of all, I don't know that we have any strategies for blocking the bill. I think, from our caucus's standpoint, the big item to be worked on, to be accomplished this year, is creating a balanced budget, and one that, again, meets Minnesota's priorities. We all want a structurally balanced budget. How do we do that and do it without harming job growth and economic prosperity for Minnesota? So that's our number one job. The majority sets their priorities. If they want to, go down the road in a hurry here on what I think is still a very divisive social issue. Again, as somebody who was in a different seat 2 years ago, I would caution them maybe at moving so quickly on this. I've heard a number of times from some of the new leaders about wanting to have a conversation with Minnesota. I think that was started, but certainly a lot more to be talked about in that area. So, I hope that there will be some caution and some slowing of that attempt at this point.
I'm with Representative Loon. We haven't spent 30 seconds discussing this in caucus because it hasn't been a real push yet. I guess from my perspective, it seems to me that the thrust of the Vote No campaign was, hey, we've got DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, here in Minnesota. It's already in statute. The status quo is fine. No need to put it in the Constitution. Well, if that's the case, then there's probably no need for any additional legislation to change things. And once that comes up, if it does, then I guess we'll deal with it at that point. But I don't know whether or not it will. As was pointed out, the DFL more or less has control of that issue.
But I guess in theory, do you individually support the concept or the idea of legalizing same-sex marriage?
Do I personally?
Yes, sir.
I'm speaking on behalf of myself now, not the caucus. No, I don't. But that being said, I don't get to decide. A majority of the legislature and the governor decide.
What about you, Representative?
Again, I have concerns about us taking this up. I think this is a leap from the vote that was made, and I think that I need to do a lot more talking with the folks in my district about what this would mean and what they're supportive of, what their vote meant this fall.
So, I guess
I'm still looking at this issue, and I don't have a position at this point.